Welcome to the Blackhouse on 106.1 FM, Wellington Access Radio. You're in the studio today with, what's a special? We got a good lineup today. It's me, it's Eddie, we have Mikhail, we have Mia, we have London, and we have Sasha in here today. Leah's taking a break. I think she must be pretty stoked about that. How's everyone going today?
Doing good. How are you guys doing?
It's all vibes.
Yeah.
Alright, what's everyone up to this week?
Ooh.
Studying?
Yeah.
Classes start next week.
Yeah.
It's week 7.
It really is week 7 and it's passing by like, this trimester has been moving. And as with that note, we're doing a student episode today. It's a black student episode today, so sorry for those people who have classes next week. I feel your pain.
So all of us?
Yes.
Sorry for
basically all of us. Yeah, sorry for us. It's okay. We had a good 2 week sit back. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about like the black student experience, and since we're all based in Wellington, we're going to mostly be basing our experiences from Wellington, VUW, we're all repping. But yeah, so I'm going to take it over with the first question. Are we ready? Are we ready to dive right into it?
I guess what do we want to kind of come out of this show with? Like what's our kind of goal?
So wow.
no.
On the spot already. But at the end of the show, we just want to sort of just shed some light into a conversation that needs to be had. I know that's always the running theme with Blackhouse, but this specific light that we want to shed is to us students, and just letting y'all know that these conversations are starting with vim and energy, and to come out of this feeling like, okay, I'm not so alone experiencing this, and 2, there is other people I can connect with who probably feel the same way, you know. So because we have a good blend of like Kiwi, Afro Kiwi, is that a term?
Yeah.
Afro Kiwi.
Yeah, that's
Afro Kiwi, and we have like international black students as well, and yeah, we're just gonna be sharing our experiences from those 2 perspectives, and yeah, so.
Alright, good answer.
On
the
I feel
spot.
like I'm being interviewed. What's going on?
So Mia, what do you bring to this company?
Right. Well, we're gonna move into our first question. So, what's our current landscape as black students in New Zealand? Like how is the environment for us when you're first walking into an institution, an education institution? What does that feel like for black students? How does that look like for us?
Like at Vic?
Yeah. That's where you can base your experience from. I'd say, where else?
No, I was making sure. Like, we're talking about, well, I guess if we're talking about in New Zealand, then I wouldn't know anything else, I guess.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah, we only know what it's.
Yeah, this is fair. Yeah. I mean, the footprint itself is just super small.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't have any other students of the African diaspora in my classes.
Yeah.
I see Afro students walking around.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, like I know you guys.
Yeah.
And I see others, but you know, if you see more than like 2 or 3 together, it's.
I feel like we're like the 2 or 3 together. That's usually around school. Just saying.
It might be like us, and then like we might like run into Abby.
Yeah.
You know?
Like once in a while, and then.
You know, but like.
Yeah. If we have a VATSA meetup, that's where like most of them will come down. The turnout last week was probably the greatest turnout of students at Vic. We had a talk on racism at Vic, and we just wanted to hear this opinion from students, and this is from the Student Association VATSA, and that was probably the most black people in one room that I've seen since I've gone here. Yeah, and it was like, were we like 10? 20?
I was not there.
15 people,
yeah,
maybe?
15 people.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Big turnout.
Yeah, that was a huge turnout, 15 people.
Wow. Well, it's one of the things that, because I'm new to Vic, so I've only literally just been started this trimester, and I work full time as well, so I don't spend a lot of time on campus. But then all my undergrad, I was at Otago. And it's the same sort of thing happens. It's like, the 2 turnouts would be games night, and then anytime there was an Afrobeats night, and that was the 2 things.
Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah. Well, what about you, Sasha?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel pretty similar to London. Yeah, I take anthropology and film at Vic, and in my anthropology classes, I think that there are some Pacifica students, but like no more than 3. And then in my film classes, I can probably count like on one hand all of the students of color out of like a 200 student class. Yeah, I think the closest environment that I can relate Vic to is sort of, and maybe I don't know if you want to talk about Montana at all, but I think racism here and just like the general vibe and culture on campus is that racism is very covert and hidden and sort of like manipulated in a way where people don't really want to talk about it, but also they try to disguise it as something else so they can get away with it. That's what I've noticed a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I think also generally there's just like a lot of like colorblindness where people don't necessarily want to acknowledge differences.
And like grouping everybody in one thing, I'd say. Yeah. Like every person in the BIPOC community experiences the same level of racism as everybody else. Like it doesn't come in different shapes and sizes. You know?
I don't have experiences at Vic because I'm not a student.
Yeah.
But I obviously grew up differently because I experienced different parts of like cultural, like I don't know what it is, but playing sport and stuff. There's a lot of like coloured kids in the teams and stuff like that, but not really a lot either because where I come from is in Plymouth. It's a really small area. There's like I was the only African kid in my grade, so it was pretty weird for me.
Let's say you had a question based on like the sort of courses. So yeah, obviously you're doing anthropology. What are you studying? Sorry, London?
I'm getting my master's in communication.
So that's my kind of question sometimes and I found that at Otago was like, and I guess Otago is from my experience, is a very kind of medical field. Like the health sciences are the kind of strong courses there. And I always wondered that was something I picked up, and it's only and the same sort of thing that I've only noticed probably since I've moved to Wellington, is the fact that. And I guess it comes to that sort of idea of, I guess, like with, I guess, some of those immigrant narratives around, like, you know, what are the career pathways and what are you, that you lead into. And that's what I found really interesting, coming from an arts, similarly from an anthropology and kind of politics background, being often, like the only black kid in the class, but then my friends who were doing health sciences or biochem or that sort of thing, there would always be other people in their classes because it was going through those kind of medical pathways and those fields. So is it one of those things where we feel like, is that like is that something that comes up at Vic as well with like, I guess law would be the comparable thing here? Is that if you're a law student, you're more likely to find other black people in your law courses than you would if you were in other spaces?
I don't think that I know any Afro students in law,
I know one.
But I can think of a comparable thing to what you're saying right now. I mean, Mia studies hard sciences.
Yeah.
Abby studies hard sciences.
I mean, I feel like also in that, so I'm a STEM major and there's barely any black people in my class at all. Like, there's barely people of color to begin with in my classes. I would say the largest demographic that we have of like people of color is probably like, this generalized, but like Asians, but also that is less than 25% of the class, and then you have barely 1% of black people in STEM at all. And it's funny because when I was trying to make a connection with one of my friends, the first thing we connected over is that he's the first black person that I've seen who is in a higher level than me, at least in doing masters, that is black, and that's what we connected over. Because the first thing I asked is like, how is your experience as a black student? Because I've never seen us being represented in anything higher than bachelor, at least coming here. And is it because our population is small, or just, I mean, I see a lot of black people when it's Afrobeats night, but like not many students or whatnot. But yeah,
I think it's always different, like when you get everyone in like one place, like, you know, if you have like VOTS or if you got Afrobeats night, then it's like everyone's, you know,
has a reason.
It's like it's the place, you know. It's not, and if like, you know, especially Afrobeat, it's like it's more than just food, right? It's community, something that's familiar. Everyone's gonna show up to that thing. I feel like, I mean, the population's not big. Like, let's just call it what it is. Like, there's not a lot of us here. And and then we're all in our own corners, you know what I mean? Like, you're talking about growing up in New Plymouth and you're the only Afro kid in your class, and, you know, we're similar experiences all around, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I definitely kind of get where you're coming from, Abby, of, like, being in, you know, health sciences fields, feels like a lot of, you know, immigrant families, you know, they always kind of push for, you know, high-level white-collar jobs, which obviously definitely leads into health sciences, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that definitely makes sense. But I feel like maybe, like, outside of that, like, that pathway, we're, like I said, we're kind of all in our own little corners, and we come together when we can, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like even if I'm trying to see you, like, we have to make an effort to see each other if we're both at school.
Yeah.
You know? It's not very easy.
Yeah. So, with that, like, are there any, well, they are, but, like, would you guys mind sharing any experiences, those isolating experiences of being the only student in the class? Like, is it undermining? I'm asking this like I'm an interviewer, but right now I'm talking and I can think of, like, 5 experiences where I was like, this wasn't right, but where someone is either undermining you or, like, expecting too much of you just because you're a black student, or just singling you out in a way.
Expected me to just be an NBA player, basically.
Yeah.
Like, just being good at everything, like, athletic-wise. And just, like, the little side jokes and everything that they make that they think is funny, it's just not.
Yeah.
And being the only kid of colour in the class, you're kind of like... Because in South African school, it was different, because, like, if jokes were like that getting flying around, there's a lot of people there that will take it in, you know? Whereas here in New Zealand, it's just me, and I'm just like, okay.
So you have to just absorb that on your own.
Yeah. That was growing up in New Zealand, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How old were you when you first got here?
13.
Huh?
Yeah, 13. So I did 2 terms of high school in South Africa, and then I moved here.
Yeah.
So it was a pretty big jump.
Yeah. But, like, Eddie, you've been here since...
Yeah, I moved over, so that's once I was 3.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, so the same thing. I went all through primary school. But I mean, again, like, I was in a rural country primary school, and not saying that it wasn't weird racist experiences, but it's also the sort of thing, it was like a small farming community. So the vibe I always got was just like, there's enough people, it's a small enough close-knit space that you're kind of like, it's not to say that people don't see the race side of things, but it's like everyone knows who you are, you're active in the community, they know you're part of the community. And then went to high school, so I went to a boarding school in Dunedin. So I spent 9 years in Dunedin, and that was when suddenly everything ramped up, because it was suddenly I was an all-boys boarding school, and the boarding house was kids from other small farming communities that, so it's that sort of thing, but instead of it being people that were in my community who knew who I was, and I guess there's that kind of thing of like, you know, you are just kind of there, or you're part of the community, it was suddenly being like, oh, now I am very clearly the only black kid in this space. And then, and that was very much a kind of thing that followed through, so up until uni, like up until I was kind of 18, I'd met 3 other black kids.
What? Wait, up until you were in uni, you met like 3 other...
Yeah, so yes, I did scouts when I was, or like boys brigade, which like scouts when I was probably 8 through to 13, and there was 3 Tanzanian boys or Kenyan boys who were from another kind of farming community nearby who attended for maybe 2 or 3 years. Yeah. And after that there was just nothing, and all through high school.
Oh my gosh.
And then I got really annoyed because then I found out at uni there was a whole group of, there was, not in my school, but then at some of the other Dunedin schools, there was quite a few other black kids, especially black guys, that I had to, and then one of my mates knew, and I was just like, bro, how did you not make that connection?
Why?
That this was and the people that I should probably wanted to connect in with, and then weird that I didn't ever cross over with any of them at any given point in time.
Yeah.
And then yes, I remember like uni, I started, and then the first thing I went to was like an African students thing, and at Otago for my first year, the African Students Association ran for the first semester, was vibrant, like busy, did lots of stuff. Yeah. And then after that, and it was a continuing trend for the rest of my degree, it just died. And it was, I don't know what happened. Yeah. But you maybe get an Afrobeats night every once in a while. It was just it just kind of died, and it was a really battle to kind of actually hold
it together.
Yeah. Yeah. But even in that first kind of like semester, like just suddenly being like, going to a thing and there are 50 black people in one spot, you're like, wow,
Right.
this is great.
It's just so different. It
Yeah.
feels like whiplash. Because sometimes, at least when I've been to the Afrobeats night, I just feel like I'm back home for a second. For just a second, I'm like, oh, okay, like there's so many people and they're playing music that I know the lyrics to, and it's not going to be like a bass in the next 2 seconds. Like, it's just, yeah, it's really cool. But yeah, so we have like domestic students, or can I say like Afro-Kiwis on this side, and on that side we have international black students. Sorry to just like bring y'all up like this.
What are you?
But I am an international black student. I am an international black student. I'm just sitting on this side. I'm a trader. But jokes. But on that side, your experience might be, I mean, our experience is a bit different, because right now this was surprising to me, of him being the only black student in your high school. At least I was not. There was barely any white students in my high school to begin with.
Really?
So yeah, there was like 3, and they all came from one family, and so they were like, that's the only ones that we knew. So this is a bit different. So what about you guys? Like how is coming here and then seeming like, I know your experience is different in Montana.
I was in Montana for 3 years.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like it's funny, I feel like our experiences are like a foil of each other.
Yeah.
A foil.
Yeah, because I grew up in California, in Sacramento, which is like one of the most diverse places in the country.
Yeah.
And, like, not just like black people, but like
Yep.
Hispanic people, Latin people, Asian people, you know, you're obviously European people, but like tons of people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I lived there for most of my life. And then I moved to Montana, and I was in Montana for 3 years. You grew up in like the upper northeast, which is like completely not diverse at all. And then you moved to New Orleans. Beyond the fact that that is what it is, what I'm really trying to say is that like the experience of living in the United States is extremely varied, and it will depend on like where you are. I think that my experience here is that racism is like very I feel like it's like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone just went through the 90s where there's been like all this really good representation on like TV. There's been like all that, and there's like the Hughleys are on TV, and you got Martin and you got Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
And everyone's like,
Yeah.
does racism still even exist?
Oh my God.
Is it even like a thing? I
Yeah.
feel like that's where, I feel like New Zealand is like just after that. That's where I feel like New Zealand is. Like they're like going through like the reckoning, because like I feel like things are said to me that are like very subversively racist.
Yeah.
But the people who are talking to me don't know that they're saying racist things.
Yeah.
Give a good example. I was at a bar last night.
Yeah.
And this is the bar I go to all the time. I like to know the bartenders. I'm like friends with the people who work there. And there was this guy that was super drunk, and he like knocked over his water glass, and it like fell and it like broke, and like I kind of like rolled my eyes and like was like, oh, this is like really annoying, because he was sitting right next to me.
Yeah.
And this girl next to him saw how annoyed I was, and she was like, oh, you're the security guard, aren't you?
Oh.
And I'm like,
Okay.
and to be fair, when she said it, it didn't click right away. In my head, I was like,
What?
no, I'm not the security. I'm at a table with another person. I have a drink. I'm not dressed like security. I'm not anywhere near the door. I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, why are you asking me if I'm the security guard?
So what's my night off? Like,
Yeah, and so like I went and like told one of the bartenders that like the guy had like broken his glass, came back, and my friend was like, dude, let's go, like let's get out of here, like this chick right here, she thinks that you're the security guard, like let's get the hell away from her.
Yeah.
And
It's just.
but like stuff like that, or like especially if we're talking about like student experiences, like I'll be, I'm studying critical race theory.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that my professors have said multiple times, they'll be like, oh, no, it sounds like what you want to do for research is like life's work. Which sounds on like one level, like, oh, like it's really great, like you have like such a passion, like this is going to be your life's work. But really, I feel like subversively, it's like a deterrent. It's like saying, hey, like you need to like scale down your project. You're going to be fixing this problem for the rest of your life.
Oh my.
And that's
I feel like I also get a very similar message from my professors about topics that I want to write about they often tell me, like, scale down, like, this is too big, like, these
Yeah.
ideas,
And
you
I'm
need to be
like,
more reductive.
I don't think,
Yeah.
I don't know, I explained it to you and you seemed to understand.
Exactly.
And
It seems like it's minimizing your voice in a way, just like these experiences are not. We
yeah.
can't put all these experiences in one. Yeah.
I think also going off of all of that, London, I think that generally what I've noticed is that a lot of the conversations that do happen around racism here, and I think, again, like, this is me coming from having these conversations, like, all of my life, but also, like, in a more academic sense, getting opportunities to have these conversations since I was, like, 15. And so, I don't know, like, sitting in a circle and talking to a bunch of, like, Black students and students of color isn't anything new, but I feel like here there's more of a need for,
That kind of.
I don't know if, like,
space.
elementary is the right word, but, like, just basic foundational conversations where it is very, like, anecdotal and people are sharing their experiences, where I feel like, again, even though the U.S. has a lot of different areas where Black people experience very different things, I feel like generally, just because Black people have perhaps more of a platform there, there's more of a public discourse around that, and from a younger age you are able to have those kinds of conversations. And so, I don't know, I mean, I think here, yeah, I've noticed that professors sometimes can be reductive in some sense when you want to talk about something that might be, I don't know, too big for the essay topic or too big for the class.
What do they mean by too big? Like, if you can break that down for us.
So,
Like an example, if you don't mind.
Well, we've talked about my research project
Yeah.
on this podcast about, you know,
Yeah.
and really, like, my goal to, I mean, if I can put it as simply as possible, is to create, like, significant solutions and pathways that lead directly away from us using race as, like, an identification term.
Yeah.
Or as, like, an identification factor for, like, who we are as people. And I think that if we're willing to have critical conversations about, like, the way something like race functions and, like, how that discourse functions on, like a very real level and in real ways, then we can really have those conversations and, like, create those solutions. But those types of critical conversations are not popular.
Yeah.
And, like, when I say popular, they don't happen a lot. And people often don't like having those conversations because they don't know how to have those conversations. And so then we come to, like, even with professors in class, you know, sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, like, if they even, like, get where I'm coming from. And I find myself, I always hate, I don't know, I hate when I'm writing something and I'll write something about, like, the Black experience. And they're like, you need to cite this. I'm like,
exactly.
From
no,
where? What do
I
you mean?
don't. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't need to cite this. And that was one thing. I mean, I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be in grad school. I'm glad to be here right now. But that was one thing that I was worried about with coming to grad school is, like, am I going to come to grad school and, like, have this tension between, like, me and,
The professor.
like, not, and it's really not, I mean, yeah, but the professors are probably like, am I going to have this struggle with, like, literally academia itself?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
Just trying to put my experience down as something valid, and then them being like, well,
Yeah.
I think
you have to
that's-
remove yourself
I
from
think
that, and
that's
how.
Also just sort of the trade-off
Yeah.
of pursuing academia, and I feel like I've, at least over the past couple of weeks, I've contemplated whether or not I do want to stay here and pursue my master's and continue down this road of academia, even though I know that in some sense I will have to give up some of my Blackness or some of my experience within that realm because I'll need to cite that. And oftentimes even, like, I remember in one of my film classes, it was a research class last summer that I took. I tried to cite Bell Hooks in one of my papers, and they said that wasn't an academic source and that I couldn't cite her.
What?
And just, yeah, and I think, I don't know, I think I've been contemplating a lot that even though Bell Hooks, like, as most people know, like, she is a renowned author, so amazing, has done so much work, but she is still not considered academic in certain circles. And I feel like, I don't know, I've been contemplating a lot about how much of myself and how much of my authenticity do I have to give up in order to be seen as valid, I guess, within academic circles.
That literally segues into thinking of, like, the Black experience, that, I mean, diverging into these kind of environments, or professional environments, you would say. Because a lot of people, I mean, we've talked about how these conversations just starting up, at least in New Zealand, with, like, students and things like that, and how hard it is for people to start talking about them, and how, again, repeating the word reductive, professors and people in academia are towards us talking about these experiences and things. I would share, like, one of the fears of a lot of people who are in higher positions, a lot of Black people who are in higher positions, at least in my field, we're scared to talk about these issues because there is obviously a certain eye that we get, and people start looking at us quite differently. We start being looked at as, like, the next Malcolm X, which is a bit of a stretch, but still, it's like, oh, these people are going to start causing issues. And inherent, like, that thought in itself is racist. That why would you stereotype me as, oh, I'm going to start violence just because I'm talking about my rights and the fact that you guys are segregating me in different levels. But it's already hard to bring up that conversation. And I mean, we had a talk, and we had one person in the talk just basically tell us what my parents have said my whole life: just keep your head down and keep working. These problems are always going to be there. You can't fix it. Again, coming back to your professor saying this is your life, this is going to be life's work. And, like, this is just a problem that's always going to exist. But that doesn't mean that it should be okay, you know? And at least transcending in your, in the field that you would like to be professionally, how does bringing up these conversations, how does that look? That's not the word I would like to use. But, like, how does that feel, having these conversations and then going back to those spaces whereby there are these people who, you know.
Like professional spaces, like places that we work?
Yeah. Because let's say we sit here, we talk about these issues, and great, that's all good, we've gotten something off our chest, but tomorrow is Monday, for example. Tomorrow's not Monday, it's Sunday, but tomorrow is Monday, for example, and you're going back to these spaces, you know. How do we go back to these spaces with this open wound?
I think that's a good question. I think it just sit on it for a second.
I think it just depends on the kind of environment that you're going into. And I think that in an ideal world, you would be able to work in a space professionally that understands your experience as someone with dark skin, and doesn't try to just enforce the rules of racism upon you, you know, wherever you are, which is kind of what you were talking about, right? You're talking about, you know, you express yourself, you say how you're feeling, you give your experience, and they look at you like you're causing all these problems. And on a very base level, you are causing lots of problems. You're breaking all the rules, right? Yeah. Like, the rule is that you're not supposed to make people who aren't Black uncomfortable. Think about your Blackness. It's gonna make, because it brings them to the forefront. Yeah. Of, or at least the forefront for them of, like, what racial issues are. Yeah. And that's that, like, the way I look at it, it's all a game, and it's how are we playing the game, you know. My thing is, like, how do we end the game? Police show up with riot gear when there's, like, Black Lives Matter rallies and not at, like, sporting events. You know what I mean? Like, these are the rules, and they're afraid that if you're breaking those rules, then you're going to push it too far. Yeah. And so, professionally, I think that you don't really, you have control enough to decide where you're going to work and where you're going to be. Yeah. Or you have control over yourself to determine how you're going to act in certain spaces. Yeah. Which, I mean.
Yeah. And again, I think, especially being in academia, I think you sort of, like, have to make a choice at a certain point. Are you going to continue to feed in to the game and to the systems and contribute to your own oppression, or are you going to take the knowledge and what you've learned to communities that can actually benefit from that. And I guess if I'm applying that to my own life, like again, something that I'm contemplating right now is whether or not I do want to go back to New Orleans, which is a majority Black city in the US, and go back to just like the nonprofit work that I was doing before and continue to work with the Black communities there and help them like literally rebuild their houses. Or do I want to try and do something else? But I think there is sort of that dichotomy of how you want to either resist and question the system or just like get your money and keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is definitely, I don't know, Eddie. You tell me. You look like you had something to say. I didn't want to cut that off.
What I find interesting, because like, I've been in the public sector, a job in like an HR department of a government agency for the past, well, for in this role like 6 months or coming up 8 months. But then, and it's one of the things, but like I had the first time that I think I've like felt uncomfortable because I asked, like, so we had like our kind of like group, like a whole business group had a day, and then all the kind of managers and directors of our kind of business group got up, and it's one of the things where like I just I was sitting there, I was like, and again in the back of my head I'm debating just like this question. I was like, well, what are for our hiring procedures, like on our hiring forms, what ethnicity data can you put in, can you input? Because, and it's the thing, because I look back and I was like talking about, when I was applying for jobs, the range across like government agencies in terms of whether I could identify myself as Afro-Caribbean or Black or at the very least African or other, and there was this full spectrum of different ages. There was no consistency, and I kind of asked, like, what are we using to kind of measure this? And then it's one of the things in my professional role, and then it's the first time I've been like watching like this board of directors kind of like squirm a little bit and kind of not answer, and it's the first time I'm just like, and then obviously feeling pretty annoyed about that, and then my teammates been like, are you all good? I'm just like, and that was the first time in my professional side of thing, and that was like a really weird experience, just that for the first time I probably really had to be like, I put something out there, and then kind of, like you said, made that kind of uncomfortability point.
Yeah.
But I know, like, in terms of my long-term career, like, that's what I'm trying to balance out is, and yeah, trying to use my master's as my kind of yardstick for is, do I want to go down the academic route? And I think, and the big thing I was thinking if I want to go down that route is, and I think I always tried in my undergrad to make things like accessible, like make it so my work isn't just something that fits in academic spaces. And I think that was one of those really difficult ones trying to navigate, is because I almost wonder if that sort of thing we're talking about, you know, toning it back, or like bell hooks not being an appropriate thing, or that Black experience not being something that is academically, like, you know, academic relevant or kind of a proper source, or I wonder if that's also part of that sort of thing of, is it trying to, in doing that and making those experiences there, does that actually make that work more accessible to a wider audience of people? And then that obviously that kind of pushes up against this kind of idea of what academia is.
Yeah. Emma? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, and I think part of, I guess part of my other thing with pursuing academia is, in some sense, you also want to sort of like win a seat at the table. Like, you do want to make that work accessible to people that don't have access to these kinds of academic spaces, but also at the same time, you do want to be seen as valid by these sort of like masters and gatekeepers of academia. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in that same breath, when you were talking about how do I distinguish myself in this form, like what do I take? I've realized something with at least being here is that BIPOC as a community, we are individuals in ourselves and we have different experiences, but those kind of emerged together in like one pot of everybody goes through this. And so when it comes to addressing racism, they think one fits all. And so let's say addressing racism towards the Pacifica community, the Asian community, addressing the Black community, and it's like, okay, well, they're all minorities, so we're just gonna treat them as a minority. So if this worked for this person, it's gonna work for this person. And there's definite differences to how it manifests itself. And like, what do you guys think about that in terms of how we're grouped together and our interaction with like people of color?
I think that we are linked together by our racial experiences, and that's why we relate to each other. And I think if you look at like the history of race and like where we've been and what that looks like, then like we've all been through like generational traumas, and we experience like the traumas that we have, like whether it's, you know, the like the overt racist acts, the more implicit racist acts. Like we all experience those things, and we can perceive how those things permeate in the world that we live in. We get that, right? We all understand that.
Yeah.
But I think at the same time, something that's not acknowledged enough, and definitely not acknowledged in the situation that you're talking about, is that we're all really individual people who have our own experiences, right? And just because I look like you, because we have the same skin color, doesn't mean that I believe the same things that you do, I have the same morals or values that you do. Like, we connect on a racial level, but at the end of the day, we are two different people.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is, like, you can't say, okay, well, you know, we fix, you know, maybe posse students, maybe they need housing, right? And so, like, we're going to create, like, a government program that, like, gives housing to minority groups, right? But, like, if you're, like, an international student, maybe if you're from, like, you're from Africa and you've immigrated here, like, maybe that's not what your need is. Maybe you have a different kind of need, you need different support, right? And so you can't just say, okay, well, like, we're fixing racism because we're creating this one program that's going to help minority people.
Yeah.
Like, you're still not being, like, even within that solution that you're creating, you're not actually creating
a solution,
a real solution to the problem that actually exists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause building on that, like, I think one of the things I found, and it was interesting, like, my first year, like, suddenly, like I was saying, like, suddenly having black friends, and obviously recognizing there's the way in which we connect over, like, some of that shared experience, and, like, at a black community level. Then my second year suddenly realized that, like, at Otago, the majority were, you know, we're either first, second generation African migrants, and then for me, like, well, I'm third, fourth generation Caribbean, and then suddenly being like, oh, there is this difference here, and then suddenly just the kind of, like, shared experience with this race, or even if it's just around blackness, suddenly doesn't quite meet that need, because suddenly it's like, oh, well, here is a very different sort of thing that I need to kind of work out in this community that I need to kind of be in this space where this suddenly isn't working or isn't providing that anymore.
Yeah, because just because we both experience racism and we might bond on that over a certain level doesn't mean that the way that you experienced it is the same way that I experienced it. And so like our needs even on that level might be different. You know, even if we're from the same diaspora. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where, I don't know if this is a good usage of it, but isn't that where intersectionality plays a part? Of, like, having the differences between, let's say, I'm speaking of this, and I should have probably started with this. Like, let's say, microaggressions. Let's start with that. Or misogyny. Let's say, broad topics. Because we had this conversation before, Sasha, where we were talking about how right now we are all navigating the minority space, at least starting with VUW, navigating the minority space at Vic, and how we're introducing, like, there's this club for black people that you can come and uplift your culture and find people with similarities. But then we have also different POC clubs as well in the same thing, and in a sense, it feels like we're invading a table that didn't have a seat for us.
Do you mean that, and this is me just asking a general question, because I just want to know more. Do you mean by, like, in the space that VUW is in, like, in the room that you're in, like, you feel like you're invading a space? Or do you mean, like, by creating that space, like, because VUW exists, now you're forcing yourself at a table, at a larger table? Or do you feel, you probably feel comfortable at VUW?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, in the sense of, like, that community, starting to build that up. So, how you were speaking about having the housing problem, and how if you create the housing problem that affects Pacifica community, that's not necessarily the biggest problem in the black community. The biggest problem could be mental health and things like that. So I'm talking about the club integrating into this minority space whereby we have different needs, even though we're under the minority group, we have different needs, and it just seems coming in with our different needs. I mean, when we walk in the room, the first thing someone's gonna notice is that you're a black person. Like, this is what you come with, and they're gonna have inbuilt stereotypes for you. And so we're coming into this table, we have things, needs, and at least boundaries that we need to enforce as a people, and that might not look the same with other groups of people of color. In a sense. And that's what I was trying to get at.
Okay, I don't know if you'd have the similar sort of thing as well. I find it interesting, and what I found interesting was, especially coming through like a New Zealand high school and coming from that sort of things, and how, I guess, often being the only black kid, or if you got the other black people in your school, it might be your siblings and that sort of thing. Is it a kind of feeling where I also wonder is for a lot of domestic students, you've come out of this space, and at that point the majority, like the primary kind of way in which your black experience is shaped is by your family, and you hit uni, and uni is this time of independence and freedom. And I wonder, is there a kind of similar sort of thing where by hitting that point that also coincides with it's that in terms of when you're trying to build black spaces and build these kind of communities that can take up space and can essentially make it state like this is what we need. Is it about trying to like get people to look at that kind of experience as, you know, this is a time of independence, but it's a time in which you can form a black identity outside necessarily your family, sort of thing. Because that's one of the things when I was at Otago, I really struggled with, was getting people to involved in the African Students Association there. And we always joked you had about 2 weeks at the beginning of the year to essentially get someone into the club.
Yeah.
And before they just disappeared into the rest of the student population. And I wonder if that's the sort of thing, I wonder if you kind of felt the similar sort of thing growing up and coming through New Zealand high school, and then has that been something that you've come across, Miko?
It is definitely like that, because obviously like at home we're cultured, but then obviously stepping outside the doors of home when you're with your friends, everyone at school, they talk differently, they sound differently. They're like, oh, why do you talk like this when you're with your family, and then you sound like this when you're with us? So it is kind of weird. There's a lot of things that you're thinking like, oh, do I need to change, or like, do I need to be like these people as well, or do I just stick to what I know? And it is kind of hard, because obviously leaving home and coming to Wellington, my parents are still there. It's not really cultured, especially with like second and third year generation Africans in New Zealand. They don't really follow their culture, like you said. They only come out for like Afro events, which is like one night a month where they want to show everyone that they're African, and then it's done. So yeah, it is pretty like weird.
And I guess you guys can say anything about this if you think I'm wrong, or if you agree or don't agree. But I think
Don't say anything.
yeah, I mean,
It's a safe space.
I think when we're talking about representation, which is a big topic these days, right? Representation, whether it be in the media, whether it be like us at school, making sure that we're like we feel seen. I think that representation, I think the important part of that, it's not for other people, it's for us ourselves, right? And like, we want to see other people that look like us in the spaces that we're in, because it makes us feel as if we belong, like we're supposed to be here. Like, we walk into a room, and even if I'm the only person of color there, right, I belong there. If I'm there, if I want to be there, if I am in my master's class, I'm not any less worthy than anyone else. But I think the representation reinforces that idea, right? And I don't think that we all need to be the same to feel representation. I think if we're talking about race, I think we need to know that there's someone else who like looks like me, who is also here, and it reinforces our own security about ourselves, so that we don't feel like imposters in spaces where we actually do fit in. Yeah.
I think I can definitely relate in the sense of being in my lab. At least I worked in a lab for a little bit, and majority of my encounters was mostly with Pākehā, and it was male Pākehā. Basically, it did feel like I was in a place whereby, okay, I'm paving a way for other people to come behind me, like other black students who would want to do this. And now I'm going out to like any STEM black student that I see, and I'm like, you should probably go and do this program because it's quite great for you. Because I've set foot in that environment, and even though I wanted to feel like belonging because there's somebody who looks like me, but unfortunately they wasn't, I created that sense for somebody else. And that segues into our community organizations and how they can do better to give us those bridges to get into these, professional places. Because the one main thing, at least I wanted to see with student associations and whatnot, is paving a way for Black students or students in that demographic to go into the professional world, whereby we already have representatives there. So that's at least my aim, and if there isn't anyone there, to be the first person to pave that way into there, And it seems like a whole wholesome rainbow on a shirt type, get our kids in thing, but it's just having that person in a professional environment gives you a sense of, if they made it, I can.
Yeah, I mean, I think it reinforces so many ideas, like, is this a safe space for me to be in? Okay, well, if Mia was in this program with a bunch of white guys for 3 years and she graduated, then, maybe it's really not that, even if there's not, you know what I mean? And, to me, that's kind of like what paving the way means. It's, you're not out there literally, laying brickstones, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
But, I think just reassuring ourselves that we belong in spaces when, we're so self-conscious a lot of the times about, do we belong? How are we being seen? How are we even being perceived by our professors? How are we being perceived by each other?
Yeah.
All these things. And I think at the end of the day, we want to just know that we can be somewhere and just be. Kind of like what you were saying, Eddie. It was like, you lived in the farming community, and everyone knows who you are, so you grew up there, so it's fine. And then you step out of that, and now you're like, yeah. So. Yeah.
It kind of gives that heart as well, because in the sense of when you are there, there's this insecurity whereby everyone's looking down on you, or everyone's has these pre-assumptions of this person's going to be like this. And I can give my 2 cents on the first time I was in the lab. I felt like, I don't know, first of all, I'm not anywhere near the level of anyone in that lab. All of them were my seniors, and they were quite great at what they're doing. And I don't know anything, really. I only know how to use a thermometer at best. And so everybody's skill level is above mine. And then being the only Black person in that space, I felt more insecure of the fact that, okay, they already have these pre-assumptions about who I am as a person. And now because I don't have the skill level to their standards, it's even worse, because now they see me as a burden that they're lugging around. And that's a very isolating feeling when you're in a space where there's no one, while if there was somebody who looked like me, and even if we're not from the same area in Africa, there could be, just a Black person from any other area, and they've been there, I'm like, okay, so they know that I'm not incompetent. It just feels like this sort of a reassurance that they don't know I'm incompetent because of my race, because then again, there's a lot of, the stereotype of that.
Yeah.
A bunch of stereotypes about Black people and effort and work. How do you think the community pillars could promote more inclusivity and equity, and what role do you think these governments and institutions have into making the Black student experience better?
I think it's tough, and I think part of it is the population dynamic, where I think it almost feels like some level from a government standpoint, there's not a significant enough population or there's not enough knowledge about what that population from a big government standpoint to be like, we should be doing something to address this, right? So I think what happens is I think we get a lot of fun, that for a lot of organizations, you get things through stuff like, let's say from a government thing, the Ministry for Ethnic Communities, because that filters down the sort of stuff. But I also I think part of it is trying to, is almost reliant on the people who are in those positions, who have maybe I know a few people at Ministry of Ethnic Communities, I know a few people through a couple of different agencies, and I think part of it is it's almost encouraging them to start those kind of mentorship pathways and start building that through uni.
Yeah.
Because it's almost the sort of thing of, and that's really one difficult one to balance, because as a student it's probably quite hard to know who those people are. But I also think there's that sort of thing of, that's one of the things I'm always trying to work out is how could I kind of help someone else kind of take the same path that I have into the public sector, because I didn't necessarily have that. And then once you kind of establish that, then it probably gives you a space to kind of start formalizing and making that pathway much more tangible, much more continuous.
Yeah.
But it's probably a tough one, because it's almost like who has to start that ball rolling.
Yeah. And people who are up there, do you reckon conversation like such are happening with people who are already up there? So like community pillars who are already in these spaces. You reckon these kind of conversations are something that's ongoing? Or something that needs to be encouraged to start?
I think that something needs to be encouraged to start.
Yeah. To at least get the ball rolling in a sense. Because at least when you're up there, because of the conversations I've had with people who are just always like, oh, you need to make sure that you get up there, make sure that you're not a problem for somebody else. It is hard to pave that way, but in the same way, if these conversations start from below and they're encouraged to start, you have a safer space for professionals to start talking about this, because all they need is a safe space as well. Just like how students, we need a safe space to discuss how our experience differs because of our race. People need, like, in spaces that we want to be at, need a space to, converse and acknowledge these differences, and that we don't just have to put our head down and keep going, because it will transcend down to the next person. The next person that comes into the office will have to keep their head down, and all of a sudden if you start talking and you're like, well, this is not okay, you're looked at as a nuisance. And so, because I watched this video whereby there's this black guy who was going around showing this intern like, oh, this is what to do, and and there was a black intern, and there were a lot of things that were not okay in the workspace, as in there was a lot of jokes, a lot of microaggression, and the intern kept calling them out, and at some point made a very big deal about it, and the professional, like the guy, was just like, I don't think you should be doing that, because now it's making me look bad, and it's because not addressing it in the first place just affects the next person. Yeah. And it goes down to like, what is this? I heard a phrase about people pleasing, and saying that people pleasing, if you are a people pleaser as a person, you affect more people than just yourself. And that transcends to like our community. If you're not having these conversations and not consciously being aware that this is not a problem that only affects me, because it might be a microaggression, if I don't call it out, the next person is going to be affected by this. So even if it's going to be an uncomfortable conversation to have in the beginning, you might as well just have it for the next person, for it to be easier for them when it brings it up, or for the person who is doing that to be a bit more aware and conscious that, these are people, they have different experiences from us and what. Yeah, at least that's my little bit of wisdom. I don't have much, but
I was gonna say, in the last 2 minutes, just do like a quick between I guess me and London and Mikhail, just to kind of any closing thoughts.
I mean, I don't know, like my biggest closing thought is that you're already working against a system that is inherently anti-black. You can't change that. That's built into the foundation of all of the systems of the world that we live in. And I think, again, as academics, you sort of have to make a choice. Are you going to contribute to the resistance that hopefully leads to one day dismantling these systems, or are you going to keep your head down and sort of be complicit and not help the next person?
I think that we have to remember that we have more agency than we often give ourselves credit for. One of my favorite things, and this is going to be a paraphrase, but Angela Davis said this, is that you have to act as if you can radically change the world, and you have to do it every single day.
Thank you for tuning into the Blackhouse this week. It's been a good discussion. I feel like it's always discussions we never get far enough in. We need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
The show should be 2 hours long.
I know.
Honestly, yeah, true. It does finish once you start having a good time, which is usually the second half.
Alright, anyway, this has been the Blackhouse on 106.1 FM, Wellington Access Radio. We'll see you guys next week. Peace!